Good afternoon. Welcome to Using Emotional Intelligence when Dealing with Clients and People. I'm Kate Reese with Reese Law. The material in this podcast is not offered nor should it be construed as legal advice. The material in our podcast has been approved and published for informational purposes only. You should not act or rely upon information contained in these materials without specifically seeking professional advice. So welcome to Family Matters with Reese Law. We are a family law firm based in Fairfax with an office in Prince William County and serve Northern Virginia, DC, and Maryland. In episode 19 of our podcast, we will be talking with Christal Benton, Counsel and Trial Attorney in Family Law and Domestic Relations at Reese Law. Christal has a Master's of Liberal Arts in Psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, where she specialized in the treatment of eating disorders in adolescents and other forms of body dysmorphic disorders. Today, we are going to be discussing emotional intelligence and using emotional intelligence when dealing with clients and also other people in our day-to-day interactions. Hi, Christal. Thank you for being our guest today and sharing your knowledge on emotional intelligence. And thank you for joining us today on Family Matters with Reese Law.
Thank you, Kate. I'm happy to be here.
Good to know. So what is emotional intelligence?
Well, Kate, the short answer is that it's the ability to manage our own feelings as well as manage those of others. But a more cohesive answer is that it's our ability to understand, to regulate, to identify, and to recognize our emotions as well as the emotions of others. It also incorporates our ability to be self-aware, to recognize when those emotions are happening to us, to be able to understand what's happening to us, and then to be able to communicate those emotions to others throughout the lens of their own emotions.
Excellent. And how would you know if you are emotionally intelligent? I'm sure you must have run across somebody who thought that they were very emotionally intelligent, and you might not have agreed.
It's really not something you may know about yourself, Kate. I would even argue that we are not cognitively challenged enough day to day on whether or not we are emotionally intelligent. We're not innately designed to understand whether or not we're emotionally intelligent beings. And most people hear the word emotional and they no longer have any interest in honing those skills or developing them. So it's really up to us to kind of work to develop our emotional intelligence.
So what does one do if they do want to develop their emotional intelligence? Is there a process?
That's a good question, Kate. I kind of look at it like a skill set or a muscle that's being developed, and it's only going to be developed with really focused and intentional work. We have to really practice at it every day. And when we do, we'll find that we're creating a better work-life balance. We find that our relationships are better managed. We're better managed as well as humans. We may have better relationships with our colleagues, in our nuclear families. And certainly all of those categories also impact each other.
I can't imagine that they would have no choice but to relate. So how do you develop the ability?
Well, there are steps involved. I'm going to give the lawyer answer and say it depends. And the reason why is because developing emotional intelligence to you and your world with your emotions and your feelings and your unique relationships may look different for you compared to that of another individual. So the good news is there is no benchmark. There is no, moment where you realize suddenly you're emotionally intelligent. It's something that you have to work toward, and there are steps involved that can help you.
So what is step one?
Step one is to recognize your feelings. So when they arise, when they happen to you, as you experience them, give them a name, whether it's jealousy, hurt, anger, depression, sadness, whatever it might be. Give it a name and recognize that that feeling or that emotion is not integral to you. There's the feeling and then there's you. But it does not mean that that is who you are. And giving it a name helps you to sort of separate those two things. Another tip is You can also describe the feeling. So I've often described feelings to clients. One way that I often use is as if that feeling or that impression is sort of filling up their mouth. And then either they have to spit out whatever the feeling is, they have to swallow whatever the feeling is, or they could possibly drown in it. And that sounds subjective, but that's okay. As long as you're describing it in a way that's safe for you, it helps you to understand the emotion. That will help you so that when it happens to you again, you're able to identify it, recognize it, and also keep track of how long it takes that emotion to stick around and will better help you to manage it in the future.
Excellent. Excellent. And how about step 2? I would venture that there's some assessing that has to happen.
Yes. Actually, step 2, Kate, is assess yourself. So what that means is pay attention to whatever your strengths and weaknesses are and identify them. So be honest with yourself in that assessment. Don't be too harsh, don't be too critical, don't be too imaginative. Take the time to recognize specifically your strengths, because it's always good to remember what your strengths are in certain situations. In that same regard, pay attention to your weaknesses and be honest about the weaknesses and how you express your emotions and whether you're expressing them in a way that is healthy. Once you acknowledge those weaknesses, you'll actually start to improve on them, but you won't improve without acknowledging them first. And don't be afraid to ask for feedback from those around you, because usually those around you will be honest with whether or not you're expressing your emotions in a way that is healthy.
Right. The people that think, I'm not angry, and everybody else in the room is saying, you seem a bit uptight, maybe even angry. Well, this horrible thing happened. And then we can acknowledge it and say, you have a right to be upset about that. But let's talk about how you're feeling it and processing it, because some of these things need to not stay with you endlessly. And people can hold on for a long time to especially to their, I would say, bad parts, their faults, the things that they don't like about themselves. And they beat themselves up over it over and over again. And that's so not productive. But it's something that we see, especially if it's been a long marriage, for example, or a long relationship, and then things don't go right. And they might be dealing with somebody who, it's all your fault. That doesn't make it true, but that's what they've been hearing. That's what's been registering with them for a while. So, but there is a step 3. So tell us about step 3.
Step 3 is to be mindful. So that means to be wholly present wherever you are, whatever you're feeling. So pay attention to those emotions. Do not suppress them. Feel them as they are. And pay attention to other things as well, like your physical sensations, what's happening in the environment around you. All of those things are important. Mindfulness especially is so important, because those that we engage with every day, they can tell whether or not we're being mindful. They can tell whether or not we're truly engaged with any conversations or interactions we're having with them, or if our thoughts are elsewhere. So that's really going to improve not just your emotional intelligence, but it's really gonna better your relationships as a whole.
I have to agree with that. And mindfulness is not easy to learn, but it can be learned. It just takes some time, I think. If we're in the old habit of just moving through our day and getting things done, there can be a lack of mindfulness in that mindset, even though the goal is to get things done. They're missing major pieces that can be helpful or hurtful and get in their way. So how about step 4? What do we have for that?
Step 4 is something I think that a lot of people struggle with. I know I sometimes do as well. I think we all do. It is to actively listen. So that means when you're listening into a conversation, someone's communicating with you, do not just listen to respond, but really listen to what it is that they're communicating. And then take it a step further. Try to identify any of the emotions or the feelings that they're conveying when they're talking to you. name those emotions, just as you name your own emotions in step 1 and step 2, but try to really identify with the emotions that are coming across in their communication. That's really going to help you to build your empathy. It's going to make you a much more empathetic person, and it's certainly going to make you a much better friend to communicate with if someone's having a tough time.
Point. So, are there steps that we can practice?
There are. I definitely think listening actively is something we all can practice every day. I think assessing yourself is something that can happen every day. Another thing I would encourage is to remain curious in your conversations with others. I think that really kind of plays into the active listening. Ask questions, be interested in what someone is trying to convey to you, because people can tell if you're not actually interested in what they're saying. Children especially, your spouse especially, they can tell if your mind is elsewhere. So really being curious in those conversations is helpful. Another thing that I would encourage everyone to practice is some kind of social awareness. Really read the room that you're in. Pay attention to people's social cues, their body language. Pay attention to whether or not they're abandoning routines. Even these small gestures, these small things that they may be doing can really kind of cue you in on how someone is feeling that day. And step 6 is really to practice your social awareness. So that would mean reading the room, if you will. So paying attention to the social cues of the other people in the room, paying attention to how they're feeling, what their body language might be, how they're presenting themselves at the time. That's also going to be a critical skill for you to practice. That's not only going to help you in your professional life, but it's certainly going to help you in your interactions at home as well.
Excellent. So while it appears obvious to me and possibly to you as well, why would you want to develop emotional intelligence? Why would you want to take the time to invest in making this effort?
Well, it's certainly going to help with your work-life balance. It's certainly going to help with your relationships at home. But I also think it's just really going to benefit the individual. Understanding what you're feeling when you're feeling it, understanding coping mechanisms, ways to deal with it healthily, effectively, that's going to keep you from burnout. That's going to keep you from complications in your home life. That's going to give you better relationships with your children and your spouse. Developing that emotional intelligence it's not only going to help you in terms of how you interact with others, but I think more importantly, it's going to help you deal with things for yourself and help you to be the healthiest version of yourself that you can be. Like I mentioned earlier, that energy is going to go somewhere. It's really kind of just up to you with how it comes out.
Very interesting. As a topic as a whole, and the fact that you've got steps, you can, these are things that people could do in their everyday lives. They don't need to go see a mental health professional to learn how to do this. They can learn it on their own. What do you think is your degree of emotional intelligence?
I would say it's pretty high, but I've also been trained to recognize the emotions of others and effectively manage them and help them to find ways to manage their feelings. But I also think, just by virtue of what I do for a living, I'm a family lawyer, so I have to be able to recognize the emotions of others. I have to be able to communicate my own emotions in a way that they'll be able to understand what I'm conveying through the lens of whatever it is that they're feeling. So I'd say by virtue of what I do, it's probably pretty high.
Okay. And has your emotional intelligence changed over time?
I think it's certainly developed. I think your emotional intelligence, kind of like I mentioned, it's more like a muscle. It's something that you have to work at and exercise and flex over time. I would say that as my exposure has increased to different clients with different situations in domestic relations, there are a range and a breadth and a depth of emotions that I think you only really experience in family law. And I think my exposure over time to that has helped my emotional intelligence to develop.
That makes perfect sense. And every client is different and their backgrounds are different. The stories they've been told about themselves, including those that they tell to themselves, may not actually have a lot to do with who they are anymore. They might have been relevant in a prior time, but they've progressed and gotten older and had different life experiences. So I find that having the emotional intelligence can lead the person to have a better outlook about themselves. What do you think of that?
And I completely agree. A lot of the time when people communicate to us, Kate, we're hearing them, but we're hearing them sort of through kind of like the lens or the filter of our own experiences, our own personal feelings about ourselves, our own impressions of ourselves, our own self-esteem. And so if you can understand whatever is going on with you and understand that you may perceive things differently because of any, certain experience that you've had, or just a way that you express yourself that might be different from someone else, I think that's going to help you to communicate more effectively. And it's also going to help you in your response to that individual. Maybe you won't be as critical with your response. Maybe you'll be a bit more empathetic with your response. Maybe there's just a little more kindness now because you're understanding that whatever it is that you're hearing, maybe it's more of something that's going on with you and less something that's going on with them. And that really sort of changes the dynamic. It can change the trajectory of the conversation. I mean, I think it has a huge impact.
I agree. Because we see people in a lot of different stages. We see them at their very worst, and then we hear about the life that they had before this came about and what that was like. And then we help them move on to the next stage, and where they have freedom and the opportunity for growth. And that's the most exciting part about family law, I think, is getting to see people. One client put it to me. She sent me a thank you note that said, "Thank you for teaching me to grow a backbone." Now, I don't know how much I really had to do with it versus giving her a little bit of direction and guidance and her being ready for the lesson that she needed to have. And so that was good. And it comes up in all sorts of ways. So it's good to hear that it's helped your ability to lawyer, because we certainly get every personality type, and we need to help people grow into the changes that they're going to be dealing with and not fight against them if, in fact, there are changes that are reluctantly being made but must be made. That certainly happens in our line of work. Well, thank you very much, Christal. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Please subscribe to our podcast channel so you never miss an episode. You can visit our website at reeselawoffice.com, and you can contact Christal Benton as well as myself at 703-279-5140. Thank you so much.